Okay, now that we know how to pilot this spaceship, how to move around here in the viewport, let's move on to the Object Manager. So this area up here is called the Object Manager. You'll see this little tab, it says Object. So anything that's in your scene is going to show up here in the Object Manager. We have nothing in our scene, so there's nothing there. But let's create the simplest object we can, the simplest way. Let's go up here to this cube and click this cube. Now you can see that there's a cube here in your scene. That's this cube. And we can double click it and rename it. Let's call it Object. So now we have this cube called Object in our scene. And if we click away, we deselect the object. And if we click on it again, it's selected. And we can do the same in the viewport. Click on it, we'll see it turn yellow. That lets you know that this object is selected. So, and in the viewport, you see that it has these handles on it and this little yellow box that lets you know it's selected. And something else, a little shortcut, if you want to have a selected object jump to the front of your viewport, you select it either here in the Object Manager. Usually would do this if you couldn't see it in the scene. Then if you press O while it's selected, it'll bring that object right to the front. So that's kind of a really quick way to get objects out in front of you if you want to work on them or animate them or do whatever you want to do. So here in the Object Manager, we will have everything that's in our scene. We can rename them, we can move them around, we can parent things, we can make them children. We'll show you how to do that later. But this is just where everything that's in your scene is going to show up. So if you want to find something, you look here. And tied to this, we have what's down here is called the Attribute Editor. So you see the little tab, it says Attributes. And this is where you'll find all the attributes to your object. So everything that you want to change, its coordinates, where it is in space, if it has any special functions. We can also change the name here if we want to. See it reflect up there. So that's what the Attribute Editor is for. And the most common attributes that you're going to be editing or looking at here are going to be the position, the scale, and the rotation of this object, or the PSR. And for position, we have the XYZ, scale XYZ, and for rotation, we have HPB, but you can also go in here, this might be easier to remember, and we can actually switch it into XYZ. So these are just all tied together. It makes a lot more sense that way. So if we look at this object, we have this red axis, which is the X, the green pointing up, which is Y, and the Z pointing at depth or from us, away from us, is the Z. And something to help show you where you are in space or what you're doing is this little gizmo at the bottom. See this here? Has XYZ. So this is letting us know, because in the 3D world there's a world space that we're in. So imagine this thing is automatically the ground and the sky is up. So Y is pointing to the sky, which is up. So let's say we accidentally flipped up here and things were getting weird. We could look at this little gizmo to tell us, oh, we're upside down because Y should be pointing up, and then we can flip up. Same thing with these objects. Wherever the axis is pointing, it lets you know where it is in space. So one way we can change the position, scale, or rotation of these objects is by clicking on them in the viewport. So if we click on the X-axis, this is for the move tool, this little arrow is to move, and we drag that, we're moving it on the X-axis, and we see this number here, and it's the same exact number that you'll see here because we're moving it in the position on the X-axis. And we can actually click and drag here as well to do the same exact thing. Or we could actually even type in numbers. If we want to take it way off our screen, then we can press O and get it back again. But I'm going to make this thing 0, press O to bring it to the front again. And it's the same for all of these. You want to move it on the Z, you want to move it on the Y. And if you have an object selected, you could just click anywhere in an empty space and drag it, and it'll move it on all 3 axes. So you can see this is if you don't really care and you're just trying to get things, to be somewhere else. That's what you use that for. And the scale and rotation work the same way. And so if you drag over here on the X rotation, it's going to do it on that axis, Y, and Z. So that's how those are tied together. Now there has to be a faster way to manipulate or change the position, scale, or rotation than going over and dragging these, and there is. You have tools. So if you look up here, this is our move tool, which is usually the one you're using by default, and on your keyboard that's the E key. So if you press E, it switches into the move tool. Then we can do this. If we press R, then it switches into the rotate tool, which we can rotate. And if you look at the attribute editor here, you'll see that it's reflecting our rotation changes. And if we press the T key, that moves into the scale tool, which is also up here. So if you look at these, here's move, scale, rotation. And let's drag in an empty space, and that's going to scale it on all three axes, just like it should. So the attribute editor, the object manager, the viewport, hope you see how these are all connected, and everything that you can edit will be here in the attribute editor for the object that is selected. And so like this is what's called a parametric object or a primitive, and these primitives in Cinema 4D have these cool functions built in, so we can do things like that are automatically built in to modify your objects and do cool stuff. And that's only available here in the attribute editor. So if you want to change an object, you want to do something to it, go hunting through these tabs and you'll find out what you need to do here in the attribute editor.